The helicopter was still 40 feet off the ground when the tree line opened up. It was the spring of 1967, somewhere in the Central Highlands, and Specialist 4th Class David Horton had maybe 3 seconds to process what was happening before his M60 was already firing. He wasn't aiming at a target. There were no visible targets. He was firing at muzzle flashes, small orange pinpricks in 200 meters of dense jungle wall moving past him at 90 miles an hour. He fired. He kept firing. When the helicopter cleared the tree line, he had expended more than 400 rounds in under 40 seconds. He didn't know if he hit anything. He never would. That was the door gunner's war. No foxhole, no cover, no ground to retreat to. Just a man strapped to the open door of a Huey, 500 feet above the earth, in the most target-rich environment the NVA ever had. By the end of the war, door gunners had one of the highest casualty rates of any non-infantry role in Vietnam. The Army didn't advertise that number. The press didn't run it. But the NVA knew it, and they built entire anti-aircraft strategies around eliminating these men before the helicopters could deliver troops or extract the wounded. They failed far more often than they succeeded. This is why. To understand why door gunners changed the war, you have to understand what the NVA was counting on in 1965, when American helicopter operations began scaling up in the Central Highlands and the Mekong Delta. North Vietnamese military doctrine had been built on a fundamental assumption. The jungle was impenetrable armor, dense canopy, narrow trails, layered vegetation. These gave NVA units the ability to mass, maneuver, and disappear before American firepower could respond. The French had learned this. The early ARVN units had learned this. The NVA had fought this way for 20 years and won. The UH-1 Hueys shattered that assumption, not because it was heavily armored, not because it carried sophisticated targeting systems, but because it could appear from any direction at any altitude, deliver 30 combat-ready soldiers into a clearing in under 3 minutes, and return fire from an exposed but extraordinarily mobile platform before any ground-based unit could adjust. The jungle stopped being armor the moment Huey started operating in force. NVA commanders recognized the problem immediately. Their internal communications from 1966, later captured and translated, described American helicopter operations as a new tactical condition for which our infantry has no adequate counter. Their initial solution was to concentrate small arms fire on the aircraft during landing and extraction phases. Mass enough AK-47 and RPG fire at a hovering or slow-moving helicopter, and sooner or later it would go down. What they hadn't fully calculated was the man in the door. The door gunner's job description was deceptively simple: protect the aircraft during the most vulnerable phase of flight. In practice, it meant something considerably more demanding. A Huey on approach to a hot LZ was flying at roughly 60 to 80 knots, descending, often in a confined space, with no evasive maneuver possible. The pilots needed both hands and both feet on the controls. The door gunner was the only defensive weapon between the aircraft and whatever was in the tree line. The primary tool was the M60 machine gun, a 7.62 belt-fed weapon that could sustain roughly 500 rounds per minute in capable hands. Door gunners modified theirs relentlessly. Standard trigger guards were removed. Butterfly triggers replaced standard configurations for faster manipulation. The gun was mounted on a bungee cord or a flexible pivot system that allowed a trained gunner to swing it across a roughly 180-degree arc in seconds. Some gunners rigged additional ammunition feeds. Some fired from the hip when the mount restricted movement. They became extraordinarily intimate with a weapon system that the Army manual described in purely mechanical terms. What the manual didn't describe was the physics of the job. The rotor wash from a Huey at low altitude created a continuous 80 to 100 mph wind across the door. The gunner was exposed to it completely. In the wet season, that wind carried rain horizontally. In the dry season, it carried dust and debris. In a hot LZ, it carried smoke, tracer rounds, and frequently, small arms fire from multiple directions simultaneously. SB-4 Larry Brown, who flew 312 combat sorties as a door gunner with the 1st Cavalry Division between 1967 and 1968, described it decades later in a veteran's oral history project. The noise was absolute. You couldn't hear anything except the rotor and your own gun. You made decisions on pure movement. If something moved in the tree line at the wrong time, you made your call in half a second. Half a second was often all there was. The NVA adapted. They had to. By mid-1967, North Vietnamese units operating in areas with heavy helicopter activity had developed what American intelligence analysts called the high-low ambush. NVA soldiers positioned in the tree line would hold fire during initial approach, sacrificing the first tactical opportunity, and concentrate instead on the extraction phase, when the Huey was loaded, heavier, slower to climb, and the door gunners were often dealing with the confusion of troops boarding under fire. The theory was sound. If you couldn't hit the helicopter on the way in, hit it on the way out when it was most burdened. It worked occasionally. It failed consistently. The reason it failed consistently was something NVA commanders initially struggled to explain in their after-action reports. Door gunners fired suppression not at confirmed targets, but at likely firing positions before the enemy could acquire a clean shot. This preemptive suppression, delivered from a moving platform at variable altitudes, was qualitatively different from any ground-based fire support the NVA had previously encountered. A machine gun nest on the ground fires from a fixed position along a predictable arc. A door gunner firing from a Huey on a curved approach path was moving laterally, vertically, and rotationally simultaneously, creating a suppression cone that shifted continuously and was almost impossible to calculate in real time. Captured NVA training documents from 1968 specifically instructed soldiers to fire first at the aircraft crew in the door positions before engaging the landing force. This was an explicit acknowledgement that the door gunners were the more dangerous immediate threat, more dangerous, in the NVA's tactical assessment, than the 30 infantry soldiers the helicopter was delivering. The cost was real, and it was constant. Door gunners flew not as assigned crew, but as volunteers in many units, men who chose the open door over the relative protection of ground duty. Their average life expectancy in active combat operations was not the mythologized 11 seconds that circulated in barracks rumor, but the actual casualty data was sobering enough. In the peak years of 1967 to 1969, door gunner wounds and fatalities represented a disproportionate share of aviation unit losses relative to their numbers. What the statistics don't capture is the psychological architecture of the role. A door gunner had no evasion. Ground troops, when ambushed, could take cover, retreat, return fire from a protected position. Medevac pilots could fly evasive maneuvers. Door gunners could only do one thing: keep firing and trust the pilot. The aircraft was either going to make it or it wasn't, and their contribution to that outcome was measured entirely in the accuracy and volume of their suppression. Staff Sergeant James Meredith flew 187 combat hours as a door gunner with the 101st Airborne's aviation element before being wounded in 1969 during a medevac extraction near the A Shau Valley. In a 1992 interview, he said something that became something of an unofficial summary of the job. You weren't protecting yourself. There was no protecting yourself. You were protecting everyone else on the aircraft and the guys on the ground waiting to get on. That was the whole job. He was awarded the Air Medal with V device. He never flew combat again after the wound. He returned to civilian life in rural Kentucky and, by his own account, spent 30 years not talking about any of it. If you served as a door gunner, or if your father, your uncle, your neighbor did, drop a comment below. These men flew hundreds of missions that never made the headlines, Some of them are still here. Most of them never got a proper accounting of what they did. Tell us who you knew. NVA commanders who survived the war and later spoke to military historians were consistently candid about one thing. They never developed an adequate counter to the door gunner's suppression role. The high-low ambush was a tactical adjustment, not a solution. The preemptive suppression doctrine they eventually developed, holding fire entirely until the Huey was committed to landing, then massing fire on the aircraft simultaneously from multiple positions, occasionally worked. But it required a level of fire discipline and coordination that degraded under the stress of actual contact. The door gunners, meanwhile, got better. By 1969, the best crews in high-tempo units had developed what pilots described as a rhythm, an almost instinctive division of the approach corridor between the two door gunners, each responsible for a 90-degree sector, with pre-planned escalation based on the density of incoming fire. It was not doctrine. It was not in any manual. It was accumulated experience, passed from departing crews to arriving ones in the informal tradition of soldiers who know that what keeps you alive is not what's written down. The NVA studied those crews for 3 years and never found a satisfactory answer. Their final assessment, translated from a 1970 military district report, described American door gunners as a force multiplier that our doctrine had not adequately accounted for. They were right. The Army hadn't fully accounted for it either. The war ended. The Hueys came home, or were left behind, or were pushed into the ocean off the decks of carriers to make room for the last evacuation flights out of Saigon. The door gunners came home too, mostly, or most of them. They returned to places like Lexington and Fresno and Biloxi and went back to the ordinary machinery of civilian life. There were no parades for door gunners specifically. There was no recognition distinct from the broader dishonor that Vietnam veterans absorbed as a category. James Meredith attended the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in 1982. He found 3 names on that wall he recognized personally. He didn't stay long. He said the wall was accurate. It listed who died, but it couldn't capture what he actually wanted people to understand, which was simpler and harder to explain. That those men in the door had chosen to be there, and that choosing to stand in an open door over a hot LZ, with nothing between you and the tree line but an M60 and your own nerve, was a specific and remarkable kind of courage that the history books tended to flatten into a statistic. History gave them a footnote. They had earned considerably more than that.